all please find our seats, we'll get our program going today. Thank you. I know we all want to network and talk to each other, and I'm going to talk about some social events later that CCIM has coming up that's going to offer a lot of networking opportunities. First off, I'd like to share that CCIM Southern Nevada chapter, we are doing great. I mean, you guys are making it happen. And one thing that's amazing about our chapter is we have exceeded membership to pre-COVID numbers. We actually have more members now than we did in 2019. So thank you all for joining and being a part and participating. We, in fact, have one more new member. His name is Robert Turney. Is Robert here? He's from Polaris Realty. So when you see Robert out there, please welcome him to the CCIM Southern Nevada chapter. He is a candidate that's going through, well, he may be at 104, right? Because we have that going on today. The next thing we have on our list here is scholarships. We offer scholarships for CCIM classes from the Southern Nevada chapter and from the Institute. Today, Amelia Henry is going to come up here and talk about a very special scholarship that was recently awarded. And if I could invite Amelia up. In fact, do you mind if I invite Jeremy up as well?
Good afternoon. I'm Amelia Henry with Logic Commercial Real Estate. I am also the scholarship chair. As Paul mentioned, we do still have scholarships available this year. So if you're looking to pursue the designation, please get with me after the luncheon. The Institute also offers several cost-saving programs, including the CDEP, which is the Cultural Diversity Education Program. That's a program geared towards minorities in commercial real estate, and it helps reduce the overall cost of your core classes. In addition to that, the Institute also has a veteran scholarship. So if you've served our country and you are looking to pursue the designation, again, come see me, or you can check out the Institute's website. I'm super excited to announce that the Institute did award one of our chapter members the Veteran Scholarship, Jeremy Glore with EXP Commercial. He recently received the scholarship. So we're very excited about that. Just a little bit about Jeremy. He's originally from Atlanta, Georgia. In 2019, he joined the Army National Guard. Army National Guard. After his training, he did get licensed in Georgia. Then he took a huge leap of faith, jumped in his car, drove across the country to Las Vegas, and joined the Jung Group over at EXP Commercial. And ever since then, I mean, he's just jumped in with both feet. Very excited to see where his career takes him. So, Jeremy, congratulations, and thank you for your service.
So what's amazing about that scholarship is I want to say, at least I was told, that Jeremy was the first veteran scholarship that was given out from the Institute. So as we strive to be the #1 chapter in the nation, we also strive to be the #1 people to get that scholarship. So congratulations. I know Pam Jungi is very, very happy with him. Next on the list, I'd like to thank all of our sponsors. Now, the sponsors roll around on the screen over here, and I am also a sponsor, but we couldn't do what we do as CCIM, as our Southern Nevada chapter, without our sponsors. So thank you for all the sponsors that are out there. I do warn you, pretty soon we are going to be calling your number and shaking your hand and asking for more money for 2024 when Roy Fritz takes over. But again, we couldn't be doing what we are doing now without your sponsorship. So thank you all to all the sponsors. We do have some social events coming up. The Aviators baseball game is on July 14th. That is on the website to sign up for. Now, that is a family event. We encourage you to bring your wife, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your husband. If you have both of those, please let me know, right? And also your children. It's a super fun time, so I know it might be hot. Today's, this week is going to get really hot towards the weekend, but we've gone this long being under 100, thank goodness, right? The other thing I want to talk about is the wine soiree. We have our wine event on October 5th. Sponsorships have just opened up. Carol Browning is in the room. She's in the back in the center. If you would like to be a sponsor for the wine event, we are holding it at Canyon Gate Country Club, and it is golf movie themed. Yeah, with a yeah, maybe. So reach out to Carol. We're going to start advertising for that event soon. The wine event is always super fun, so let's go to that. Newsletter, please, please, please. Jennifer Lear's up here saying, please, please, please send me articles for the newsletter. If you have any articles out there you'd like to write, please contact Jennifer or Jackie Farley, and they would love to have those in. Now, education. What is CCIM about? It's about education. We are currently running the 104 class this week and 101. So if you know anyone who's looking to get into commercial real estate or really understand the fundamentals of how the financials work in commercial real estate, 101's coming up. We have that September 25th to the 28th. It's on the website. It's on ccim.com, or you can also talk to me or any of the other board members that are in the room about that. If I could, and you guys know I do this almost every meeting, if I could ask all the designees to please stand up so you could be recognized. If you're interested in becoming a CCIM, any of these designees could be a resource to go to. I'd also like to recognize Charlie Mack. He is the CCIM International Institute treasurer, and Charlie is in the room with us today. Thank you, Charlie, for coming out. And now, the fun part, the scary part, what's happening up north. So these faces are very, very familiar to you. We go to these two people a lot for their resources. And so I'm super excited to have, if both of them would come up onto the stage. We have Serena Kasama? Kasama, perfect. And Joe Bresney. They're here from Carrara, Nevada. They do a lot of different things in Southern Nevada. If you are a NAOP member, I said NAOP during CCIM, don't kill me, right? If you're a NAOP member or part of the Association of Realtors or any of that, Carrara Nevada are definitely the resources that go there. So prior to joining Carrara Nevada, Serena had her broker salesperson license at Berkshire Hathaway Home Services of Nevada, where she prominently worked on residential sales. Serena also simultaneously worked on Heidi Kasama's 2020 campaign for Assembly District 2.
You might recognize the last name.
Yeah. She won, did she not?
She did win.
She did win. Before real estate and campaigning, Serena worked for 2 years as a legislative assistant for Congressman Joe Highq, and she also worked in wealth management in San Francisco. Serena grew up here in Las Vegas. She went to Faith Lutheran High School and graduated from the University of San Francisco. She earned her bachelor's degree in finance with a minor in economics. Joe is director of political operations for the firm. He works with a number of their clients on issues, advocacy, voter registration, and GOTM mobilization. Joe has also spoken to us about cannabis, in case you didn't remember. He joined Carrara Nevada after serving several years as executive director of the Nevada GOP State Senate Caucus, where he established important relationships with senators on both sides of the aisle. His depth of experience with the inner workings of the legislature, its players and personalities have proven to be invaluable to his clients. So these are the two speakers today. We had three. The other one had a bout of food poisoning, so she's not here. So we wish Jenny the best. And so they're going to come up here, and I'm sure that at the end we're going to have some Q&A, possibly. So please welcome our panelists.
Hello. I'm going to get the timer out here. So I think we're going to switch to questions in about 30 minutes. And so if you have questions, we'll have time to cover them then. We have done this presentation in as little as 15 minutes and as long as 2 hours, depending on how much we drill down. So it's a little bit flexible, but if you have questions, we will have time at the end for those. So I'm going to cover kind of the process. I worked at the legislature for 8 years as the Senate caucus director. So I'm going to go over the process a little bit, and then Serena's going to cover the specific legislation that went through, and then right at the end I'll circle back and talk with you about the latest in the marijuana industry. So we will launch in. So these slides are owned by the Nevada Association of Realtors. There's an email address on the last slide for Teresa. If you want to use copies of these, you have to email Teresa. So please don't take pictures of the slides. If you want copies of the slides, take a picture of the last slide with Teresa's email address on it and email her and ask her if she'll send you the deck. We just put it together. We don't make the rules. Okay, elections have consequences. This is Governor Joe Lombardo. So if you take a look at what the numerical explanation of elections having consequences, it's 75 vetoes in his first session. The records are 48 vetoes in a single session by Governor Gibbons in 2009, and Sandoval had 97 vetoes over 8 years. At this clip, you may have Governor Lombardo surpassing that 97 vetoes in his first term because we have divided government. We now have a legislature that is controlled in both houses by Democrats, and then we have a Republican in the governor's office. So going over the composition, when I was the Senate caucus director, the Senate was 13-8, but it was 13 Republicans to 8 Democrats. Now it's 13 Democrats to 8 Republicans. So doing simple math, we can see 2 things of importance on this slide. The first is the Democrats are 1 seat away from what's called a supermajority. It's where you have 2/3 in a house. Pardon me. When you have a supermajority, you have the votes to override a governor's veto. So if you have a supermajority in both houses, it doesn't matter what party the governor is in because their vetoes don't matter because they can be overridden by the legislature. And so they're 1 seat away, the Democrats are 1 seat away from having a supermajority in the Senate. And if you look at the Gansert seat for the Republicans, it's upper right-hand corner plus 6.2D. In reapportionment, that used to be a Republican seat, and that's now a Democratic seat. And that one's going to be very, very difficult to protect. So that seat's pretty much gone. So that will get them to that 2/3 unless that can be mitigated. The other seat that's at risk is the Buck seat in Senate District 5 because that margin has been watered down to 0.1%. So it's a toss-up district. And so those are the 2 top targets that the Democrats are going to be looking to pick up. And if you look on the other side, one of the unfortunate things is that one of your best pickup opportunities is the Senate leader. I mean, if you pick a fight with a Senate leader, you're pretty much signing your own death sentence if you don't. If you shoot and miss, you're in real trouble. And we'll get to that because we shot and missed on something and there's some trouble. But so it's going to be a real battle in those 2 seats in the Senate on the Republican side, but if I was going to have to put money on it or call it right now, those are both going to be really hard to defend. I mean, presidential election, you have more young people who lean more to the left and who see less and less in the Republican Party that they identify with are showing up in higher numbers, and so it's going to be very difficult to preserve those 2 seats. So we promised you news. We didn't say it would be all good, unfortunately. Taking a look at the State Assembly, we're continuing with that theme because this news is actually worse. They're in the super minority already. There's 28 seats in Democratic hands and 14 seats for Republicans. And then the pickup opportunities are slightly different here. For any math whizzes in the room, when they do gerrymandering and reapportionment, what happens is you have a choice. You can either have a majority where you have 3-seat margin, but they're really safe, and those margins are never gonna change, or you can try and get a 7 or 8-seat margin and get more seats, but you have to water them down. You have to make all of those seats closer because you only have so many Democrats and so many Republicans in the state. So you can gerrymander those lines and draw them crazy, draw them however you want to, but math is still math. You still have to make a choice. I think that there was a strategic mistake by the Democrats in getting as greedy as they were about getting to 2/3, because this holds. But if you look at this, you know, Yeager is your speaker. He's plus 6.1. You've got a couple of seats, LaRue Hatch, plus 2.5, Gorlow, plus 3.3. Those are within the margin of error of most polls. And those folks are up every single cycle. So I think you're probably going to see a number of industries looking to go after incumbent Democrats in the assembly in the next cycle to try and get that balanced out. Because right now, there's a distinct possibility of having 2/3 supermajority in both houses to where you just have one party rule again. And I've said this many, many times. It doesn't matter if it's all Democrats, all Republicans. One party rule is very bad for business, period. It just is. When one party controls everything, they get into a competition that only serves to win primaries, and everyone else gets left out. And so that is really the 40,000-foot view analysis of what we faced in this session and what we look to face in the next session. So if you look at the Senate Majority Leadership, not surprisingly, you have 6 Democrats. Nicole Canizaro, I pointed out, it's a real funny anomaly. Both Leader Canizaro and Speaker Yeager are in some of the most vulnerable seats there are. But lucky for them, they control all of the caucus money and all of the campaign money, so their seats will be defended first. And like I said, if you take a swing at leadership and you miss, you pay a price. Speaking of that, so the President Pro Tem, Senator Spearman, ran for North Las Vegas mayor in the last election. And she ran midterm for her Senate seat, which is very smart because most people will stay out of that race and not antagonize her because if she wins, she's the mayor and you've made her mad. If she loses, she's still a senator and you've made her mad. Well, as you'll see in the next part of the program that Serena is going to be presenting, we made her mad because we backed her opponent in the mayor's race and her opponent beat her handily. And so we paid a price with aggressive legislation that targeted residential realtors. But this is your leadership team in the Senate majority, all Democrats. This is your leadership team in the minority, all Republicans. And again, that anomaly that we have, people who do what I do for a living, we look for patterns in the chaos. And it is just flat out weird that all of your leaders are in these toss-up seats because it's not usually the case. Usually your leaders are in pretty safe seats because these are always at risk. But Heidi Seavers-Gansert now in a very contested seat with a margin Democratic of over 6 points. And then Carrie Buck, the assistant leader, is now in a dead even district. So you have 2 of the members of leadership here that are at risk for their reelection next cycle. Assembly majority leadership, you have Speaker Yeager, and then a team of all Democrats that are in the majority in the Assembly, and then the minority leadership. And just to speak briefly about the position that they were in, so they had less than a third. And so there were some things that weren't surprising. There were power struggles within their caucus, a lot of criticisms of it. And that's not surprising because when you have less than a third, you can't really do anything. Like they're just outvoting you on everything. And so you're literally showing up, you go to committee meetings, you say, I'd like this, and they say no. And then you go to the floor and you say, you know, I'd really like just a little bit of this, and they say no. And it may even sometimes be bills that they agree with on the other side. But just because you sponsored it, they say no. And so it actually surprised me that the majority wasn't more vitriolic because your backbenchers usually get really shitty when they have 2/3. Like they get really, sorry. Everybody prepares to speak differently. I was sitting there for 5 minutes before I came up here going, don't say fuck on mic, don't say fuck on mic, don't say fuck on mic. And so I failed, but the backbenchers in the majority usually get really aggressive and angry at people that are below a third because they get to go, nah, 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 you don't matter. Because it's true, like they don't matter. If you don't have a third, you don't matter. You may as well just mail it in. And so these are the folks that got tasked. I mean, it's like being King Turd of Shitville because you're in charge of a group that has less than a third, and you've got to lead, you've got to make statements and be bold when no one's listening. You're in a room where you're not even getting covered because the press knows nothing's going to happen. And you've got to balance that with not going on, so you've got these 4 Republicans, and so they've got a choice. Do we keep the base happy and go off the right end, or do we keep it more toward the middle and have everyone mad at us? The left side hates us because they're supposed to, and the right side hates us because we're not right enough. So they had some tough choices to make. Overall, I give them a C+, B-. Not too bad, not too great, but they're in a position where if you've got any group that's below a third, they're in a no-win situation, and that's the situation these folks were in. It's a job no one wanted. So taking a look, some first-time things that never happened before. We had snow days. Never had snow days at the legislature. And the thing is, there was some pressure this time because Nicole Cannizzaro was very pregnant at the legislature. And so they wanted to have everything finished quickly, and then they start getting snow days. And so Leader Cannizzaro gave birth in the middle of May. Anyone who is a legislative leader doesn't plan to give birth in the middle of May because the middle of May is when you're working like 14-hour days and just pulling your hair out. And she gave birth and was back at work 3 days later. And so she kept everything going, and not what I would recommend as good maternity leave policy, but my God, no doubt that she had the reins at the legislature. So she recovered spectacularly from being off for 3 days. And they just about finished everything on time. But it was really a breakdown of politics at the end that caused us to go into special sessions. And I thought that they would turn in fire on each other about 3 weeks before they did. They almost made it through the whole way to the end, the governor and the legislature working things out. And it looked for about 17 minutes on day 120 like we were going to get out of there without a special session. And then everyone just got a big case of the fuckets and just was like, we're going to draw on fire on everybody, and we're not getting what we want, so we're going to take your stuff hostage, and we're just going to not give you anything. And so that melted down a bunch of stuff on the last day, and then that caused the special session for part of the budget. But everything came through in the end, and Serena will cover some of the specifics of what is still hanging out there. The A's took a special session. The film deal is yet to be seen. And just to go over a little bit on what all happened, like how does this work? They like for us to include it as part of this briefing. And so for any of you that are from Generation X, you'll recognize what this slide actually means, which is, I'm just a bell, just a lonely old bell, just a sitting on a Capitol Hill. So this is the process. If you don't know what that means, you probably think I'm crazy, but that's a Schoolhouse Rock episode of a Bill named Bill and how he got through the process. So it starts off at the top left as an idea. So if you have an idea for legislation, you actually have to start for the 2025 session early to mid next year. Like most people are starting now. They're taking a look at what didn't go through at the last legislature, and they're planning to put it through at the next legislature. But if you have something come up, we have people that show up about a month before the legislature every year, and they say, we've got this great idea. And we're like, great, you're about 7 months too late. So the idea has to be percolated early because you have to find bill sponsors, and you have to start to develop a broad base of support for the issue. And so if you take a look, you go through fact finding, and then when you get into the legislature, and let's say you have a bill draft, then it goes into what's called the House of Origin. So let's say it's a Senate bill. The House of Origin is the Senate, and so it will start off in a Senate committee. And the Senate committee will hear it and take action or not. And that's why majorities are so important. It's not because of what you can pass, it's because of what you can kill. If you're a committee chairman, you have the power to do something called putting a bill in the drawer. You can just do it. You can just say, I'm not hearing that bill because I don't feel like it. There were members of the assembly who said to Republican members of the assembly last session, not this past one, but the one before, that's a great idea. I like that idea, but you're a Republican, so your bill will never see the light of day and it will never get heard. It was her mom's bill that got told that. It was a good bill. And they just told her, sorry, you're a Republican. We're never going to hear your bill. And so an immense amount of power is awarded to committee chairs, both at the legislative level and in Congress. If you're a committee chairman, that's why people who are smart, they don't call committee chairman assemblyman or senator. They call them chairman because the power that they wield with that gavel is immense. You can stop anything. And so let's say that it makes it through that, gets through the committee, then it goes to the first house. And so first house passage is, so you have deadlines. You have the first committee deadline where it has to pass out of the House of Origin committee or it dies. Then you have the first house passage deadline. So then it has to pass out of the House of Origin. So Senate bills have to make it through their committee by that deadline. Assembly bills have to make it through their respective committee by that deadline. Then you have to have the first House passage by that deadline, and then it goes over to the other House, and it starts over. And so second House will put it through a committee vote or not. They may kill it in committee there, and then they will put it through a floor vote. And so at this point, your bill has been passed by the Assembly, and it has been passed by the Senate. You might be done. If the exact bill went through both houses and not one word was changed, there were no amendments, nothing happened, then it goes to the governor. That's pretty rare. Usually people want to put their fingerprints on it in the second house. And so then they'll do a tweak. They'll say, well, instead of it rolling out in 3 years, let's roll it out in 5. Or instead of it being 6.25% tax, let's make it 6.375. There's little tweaks. And so you'll have the same bill go through and it'll pass out of the other house, but now they're different bills. And so what happens is a committee forms, and it's called a conference committee. And that conference committee will sit down and they'll hammer out the differences between the two bills, and then you will vote on a conference committee report in both houses. Those are very rarely controversial. It's usually you've sent your leadership and they've sent their leadership and you've hammered out the best thing you can. There's almost never fiery floor speeches. And this is also the way in Nevada that people get screwed, that industries get screwed. Because what'll happen is you have those conference committee reports, you have something sneaked in. This happened to us 2 sessions ago. It was 12:45 a.m. It was 15 minutes before the end of the end of session by statute. It's 12:45 a.m. and they drop an amendment into a bill. It comes out, it goes to committee, and they drop a bunch of language against one of our clients in the bill. It goes to conference committee. They hurry it through very quickly. And conference committees don't have public comment. It's literally in a closed room. And so it went through the conference committee, it came out, and we had gotten a black eye at 11:59, right at the last day, right at the end of session. And so there are little sneaky ways that people will take advantage of the system and try and game the system to their advantage. They try and run out the clock on you so that your bills don't make it through in time, either with one of the House passages or committee passage deadlines. And they'll use conference committees to their advantage if they have influence with the people on that committee. Because you can sneak language in to any bill that is germane to that chapter of law. So anything having to do with real estate can go in a real estate bill. Anything having to do with marijuana can go in a marijuana bill. And so if it's germane to that chapter of law, you can sneak things in that never would have made it through had they seen the light of day. And so that's kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly. Sorry, it was the PG-13 version with swearing. But now we're going to get into more specifics on policy, and Serena's going to take over and handle that, and I'll be back to talk about weed.
Joe's favorite topic. But, and also one quick little tip as well, just going back on the story regarding like the power of the chair, and I do want to clarify for the record, Assemblywoman Kasama, not me, but the mother, has great relationships on both sides of the aisle. That was just one chair, and that was her standing policy. If any bill was sponsored by a Republican, it was dead on arrival. Not every chair is like that. I do want to make that clear for the record. It was just this one particular chair. So, but but that highlights just the immense power that the chair has, and that is where the leadership who appoints the chairs, it really all comes together in that regard. So, but going straight to the bill, so this one sucked up all the oxygen on the news cycle. It may be called the Stadium Infrastructure Project, but everyone calls it the Oakland A bill. So this one, everyone knew it was coming, but the thing that's really fun about it is you saw Joe on one screen had all of the deadline and the calendars, and this is the committee passage deadline, X, Y, and Z. The other great thing about the legislature is that we can suspend the rules at any time. So the deadline is really great. They absolutely do not have to follow it. And so in some organizations, that's a calling card, right? NV Energy, infamous. The last 2 weeks of session is when they drop their bill of the session. Every time. Last 2 weeks. It's their thing. They like it. And so, probably in the month of May, you'll see the leadership go on the floor and just say, we've declared all bills emergency bills. All the rules are suspended. So you can introduce things, and it keeps you on your toes. Keeps it always interesting. So this was a bill that was dropped in basically the last 2 weeks of session. And everyone knew it was coming. Everyone knew, all the lobbyists that were hired for it, you name it, no bill language to be found. And so when you talk to some of your legislators, and most of them did not see the bill language until it got published online as well. And so here we go. This one is going to be quite an interesting one. That is a typo on the screen. I wish it only cost $1.5 million, but it's supposed to be $1.5 billion. The original ask was $500 million. That got immediate pushback. Legislators were like, this is far too much to ask, even though we had a record surplus year for our budget. And so it eventually got drawn down to $380 million. I'm happy to go more into detail with this, but what I will say is that a lot of comparison is made to the Raiders deal. The Raiders deal, couple differences. One, the language was out there far in advance. The private financing was far more transparent. We still don't know really quite how the private financing is going to work on this deal. And then the other thing is the community benefits package. This almost sank this deal. It was the community benefits package where you had a lot of legislators, right, on the Democrat side saying, if we're going to be giving out all of this money, right, we want to see, a direct accountability on how you are going to benefit the Las Vegas or Southern Nevada community. And that is what we call the community benefits. So while this stadium is under construction, it's $500,000 a year. And upon completion, it'll be $2 million that this team has to commit into either volunteer hours or actual monetary donations into the direct community it's in. And so that was one of the big kind of negotiating pieces on this. But like I said, every time I looked at the Review Journal or the Nevada Independent, it's just Oakland A's, nonstop. Film industry. So I know, Leslie, I know you were really interested in this bill. We were all interested. This is the film tax credit bill or the film industry bill, however you name it. This is on a scale that I really can't recall seeing in many other states. Maybe the closest is Georgia, to really just jumpstart an entire industry in a state from scratch. And this is what this bill was aiming to do. You will see that it, on the very last line, did not pass out of committee by the deadline. So technically dead, but also technically not dead. And the reason for that is there are rumors for a special session, and the Oakland A's on the previous slide, that was hashed out in a special session called by the governor. The governor has the ability to call a special session. So we've had 2 so far, and rumors are this one might make an appearance for a 3rd. Don't quote me on that, but rumors. But what would it do? Tremendous amount of money to film studios, right? So there's 2 sites highlighted already in Southern Nevada. One is in Summerlin. The other is, if you're familiar with where the IKEA is, Sunset 215. That is also what is known as Zone 1. I might be swapping it, but there's 2 zones, Zone 1, Zone 2. Howard Hughes, obviously with Summerlin, said we'll commit about $750 million of our own money to making this happen. Sony, as the flagship movie studio, said we'll commit $1 billion. So it's a tremendous investment, but there's just they're big numbers being thrown around. It's too little time to really go into the weeds about it, and so special session might make an appearance on this. So failed deadline, but maybe not. So here we have a real property transfer tax. So you saw a lot, it was interesting. So the one big overarching thing about session was it was a record budget surplus. In the history of Nevada, we have never had a state government have this much money roll in. This was a combination of great sales tax revenue performance, but also in terms of federal dollars that flowed in. Every state was trying to get a piece of the COVID money and the Inflation Reduction Act money, and you name a program, and there was money flowing in. And so we saw that. So there was taxation conversations that were going on, but they didn't have that kind of urgency behind it because there was so much money that was already flowing into the budget. Now, is this a conversation? You'll see several of them. I'm going to scroll through in the interest of time, though. You saw a conversation about real property transfer tax to help with affordable housing and issues such as mental health. You got pushback not only from the development and the real estate industry, but also from local municipalities that say we're not going to waive any real property transfer tax because that is also how they get funded. So a lot of interesting places there, but no further action. Threshold for property tax decrease. Again, property tax was under discussion. It also failed deadline. You'll see a trend. Property tax exemption. You will see it also had no further action taken. But there is some interesting ones here. You'll see that who sponsors a bill also really matters. This is Speaker Yeager's bill, right? So if the Speaker of the House is sponsoring a bill, odds are it's going to pass. And this was a product of the Las Vegas Review Journal article on casinos, and when there is a transaction, you know, they get to avoid they get a loophole, right? They get to avoid paying the real property transfer tax on a large sum of money. Now, this bill passed. I think it is worth noting, though, that it's still not actually going to affect the casino transactions because those are stock transfers. So, but it will close the loophole for other entities, and so it prevents the creation of, you know, Corporation A, Corporation B. They're going to make this transfer, so they all just create Corporation C. It prevents the creation of that third entity, but the strip will still survive. Property tax depreciation. This was an interesting one. Again, it was under discussion. This is a constant. Every session there's property tax discussion, and the reason for that is, as a state, kind of unique in where we get our revenue, it almost only rests on sales tax, right? And that is, sometimes it works, and when it doesn't, people are immediately looking for other tax revenue for the state. You saw that last session with the mining tax. Well, they're looking at property tax. Now, also what's interesting is that Assemblywoman Anderson proposed this bill, and then she killed it herself. So you might ask, why would a legislator bring forward a bill and of her own volition kill it? Don't worry, I will answer this for you. So the reason for it is that property tax, everybody knows that Nevada's property tax formula is pretty wonky, right? You know, no other state uses depreciation the way that we do, and with our caps as well. There is an understanding that it does need to be taken a closer look at, but that was not the way to do it. She understood that, and so what you're going to see is, to Joe's point, over the interim, right? That is where a lot of discussions and the real negotiations happen. So this will be kind of discussed leading ahead to the next session, but as a show of good faith, she killed the bill herself with the promise that people will come to the table and we'll take a serious look at it. So, rent control. We saw several bills for rent control. Now, while this may seem to apply more to the residential sector, still affects the market as a whole. And to Joe's point, North Las Vegas had a rent control ballot initiative last year. I don't know if many of you followed it, but that played in part into the mayor's race as well, and so maybe perhaps colored why the Nevada Realtors or the Las Vegas Realtors backed Pamela Goins-Brown for mayor of North Las Vegas over Pat Spearman. And there are other organizations that decided that rent control was going to be one of their champion topics. One of them was the Culinary Union, and so you saw some partnerships form, and that is why there were multiple rent control bills brought forward this past session. This is one of them, failed deadline. Rent control as well. You'll notice the name of the sponsor. This one also, no further action was taken. All of them failed, but this one was an interesting one. So home rule for affordable housing. So this is another little kind of Nevada-specific civic lesson. We are what is known as a Dillon's Rule state, and not all states are like that. So you have an option when you're looking at all 50 states. Some are what is known as Dillon's Rule, and some are known as home rule. Home rule means that local municipalities have more power than, in many ways, the state legislature. But we are not like that. We are a Dillon's Rule state, which means that the state legislature calls the shots unless they explicitly give permission to local municipalities on what they can have authority on. And so this was trying to open up the door to say, as like an exception to Dillon's Rule, that local municipalities, Clark County, North Las Vegas, Henderson, you name it here in Southern Nevada, would have the ability and the authority to enact rent control of their own volition without the state legislature participating. This one was vetoed, but again, this was brought forward by another organization who was involved in North Las Vegas ballot. Culinary Union was the one who brought forward the rent control ballot initiative, and they took it to the state legislature when that did not pass. And so that is why you just see multiple of these bills. But this one is an interesting one, AB 213. So this is by Majority Leader Highq. So she is the right-hand woman, I guess, to Steve Yeager over on the Assembly side. And this is another one of those bills that were years under discussion, right? And so there was multiple stakeholders. The Nevada Realtors were one of them, where they came to the table and they said, we understand there is a housing issue, that the market is at a bit of a breaking point in some regards, so we're willing to talk, but we believe in a supply side rather than rent control. And so this was a product of kind of an exchange, if you will. And so this is to address the permitting process. So actually might be very beneficial to you guys, is to look at how the idea is to streamline applications that go through that permitting process. I know many of you probably No, that's long drawn out sometimes, and you go before Planning Commission, and full disclosure, I'm also on the Las Vegas Planning Commission, and we try our best. We try our best to move things along. And so this is just kind of setting deadlines, saying if you don't meet the deadlines, if your staff doesn't meet the deadlines, then this project's going to get approved and it's going to move forward through the process. And so it's trying to remove these types of obstacles and roadblocks that cost developers money, right? Time is money, and if a project gets delayed, that is money. The only kind of issue that was really interesting is this is where good policy sometimes meets the real world. There was a problem with all of the agencies, local and state, of understaffing. And so Clark County would give pushback and they say, this is great, right? And they're like, however, pre-COVID, we maybe had 100 people in our planning department, and now we're down to 10. They're like, we physically are unable to process these applications in the timely fashion that you're looking for. And so we do not want to be penalized for something that is physically impossible. And so that is where the practical, right? You have to make those adjustments. Water conservation, AB 220. I had a lot of eyes on this bill. This was an interesting one. Tremendous ramifications, right? It is the first time that you're kind of seeing a local water authority be given the authority to inhibit water to residential houses. No other state really has passed a bill like this. And so far-reaching ramifications in the water conservation topic, but there's a lot of things kind of going behind the scenes, right? The Colorado River negotiations are still ongoing. You might see periodic updates. They're not set in stone, and this is going to be drawn out for many, many years. And so SNWA position, right, is that they want to show that we have done absolutely the most, and so please don't ask us to give the most, right? Septic tanks were a huge deal in this one. I never thought when I took this job, Joe, that I would have to know this much about septic tanks, but I did. And so this one was a huge deal. You saw so much pushback against this because originally when the moratorium was announced, of which the same meeting that the evaporative cooling moratorium was announced, which we will get to that, the septic tank came out saying no more septic tanks, right? And you saw all the homeowners lose their mind, absolutely lose their mind, because the cost to convert a residential property in some cases from a septic tank and bring out the city infrastructure to hook up to the sewer line, I think the highest I saw was a quote of $250,000. And so they said, I bought this home 20 years ago, just wipe me out. You cannot ask the homeowner to foot that big of a bill. And so this was a lengthy conversation. It started prior to session. It got hammered out during session, and now it has evolved to 100% subsidy for homeowners to convert to septic, and it's a voluntary program. So you can see that sometimes the voice of the people can really make a change. Evaporative cooling, though. This is not a state legislative update. This is more local, but I know that this is definitely a kind of a topic of the hour in the commercial space, especially where water conservation meets it. So as I'm sure many of you are familiar with, there was a moratorium on evaporative cooling that SNWA put out, and local municipalities have been adopting. And so far you have Henderson and Clark County that have officially adopted it into their ordinance. You still have North Las Vegas and the city of Las Vegas lagging, but the plans for them is to adopt it in its exact same language. So the immediate pushback, right, is just for a little bit of a recap. Evaporative cooling is, the go-to way when you're constructing larger scale commercial properties for your cooling needs. However, it's very, very bad from a water conservation standpoint. COVID happened, the strip shut down, and SNWA was able to calculate exactly how much water these evaporative cooling systems was wasting. They got to just compare before, after, and the like, and so then you see the product of that moratorium come out. And so they're like, you have to convert to dry mechanical. The only problem is there was immediate concern about retrofit because that would just be a tremendous cost on your owners of these commercial properties. And so that was nixed. There is no consideration for retrofit. However, if your system were to fail, you cannot replace it with evaporative cooling. So if your system fails on your property, on a commercial one, then you will have to adopt a dry mechanical. The upside, I guess, to this is SNWA is getting part of that water infrastructure money, and so they are going to be offering subsidy of $500,000 per project in order to make those conversions if the commercial owner leads to it. I do have the contact information for who to contact on the very bottom. I understand that's very small, and so I can send an email to you guys to push out to your members about the exact person you would reach out to. It is a first come, first serve basis, and so it is highly encouraged that if you want to make that conversion, take advantage of the subsidy, Take advantage of it now. I was asked as well to kind of go out and talk to local jurisdictions and say, what is your experience with, in terms of economic development, trying to bring in business, trying to develop these commercial entities, and you put out an ordinance like this. And so, of course, what do I look at? I look at Apex, right? I look at Apex over in North Las Vegas, and I call the economic director who's managing that, and he says, did it cause a lot of confusion and chaos when it first came out? He says yes. He says because the developers or the tenants that were looking at Apex saying if it's retrofit, absolutely not. Absolutely not. And he says, but retrofit is off the table. And he says, so you're seeing people that are able to go through the process and just price it in to ongoing projects. He says, change is never easy, he says, but he hasn't had a prospective tenant drop Apex because of the evaporative cooling. So I think that's good to know. There are deadlines to be grandfathered in. I can also include that in the email just so you're, if you have clients, so that going through the application process, you have basically till 2026 to be grandfathered in terms of when that certificate of occupancy has to be passed out. So interesting. It really just shows the impact of how these policies can directly impact your business, right? If SNWA were to come in and say retrofit required, kills Apex, kills some of these businesses. But you have to find a way to kind of meet in the middle. That's what we're all about. And you're seeing Apex continue to move on. You're seeing in Henderson, right, El Dorado Valley, those are going to be warehouses, commercial zones. So you're seeing businesses are making investments into where they want to put their commercial, and it's just really important to keep them updated on policy, right? So that they're not making mistakes, that they're not going into it thinking that, 5 years from now, they're going to able to price in evaporative cooling. It's basically off the table. And you're seeing some companies take the initiative. I do have to point out F1. It's a tremendous investment here in Clark County, and they've made it with that building that you're seeing going up over on Harmon. They've already said, we're totally on board. It's going to be dry mechanical, even if they didn't have to. So, moving on. We're going to get a cannabis update from Joe. He's coming back.
All right. And one quick note on water. Some folks have said, we can't restrict water like this. You need to fight SNWA. You can't. They won. They've been brilliant about this. They have the public on their side by a huge margin. They have most of the power players in the valley on their side. And so when we met with them, we said, to avoid a war, we don't want to stop you. We just want you to pay for everything. And that's what they did. And because what it comes down to is we can't get in the way of them preserving water in the Colorado River, but we can work with them to get them to pay for everything. And so I think we need to gauge our expectations correctly on that. So cannabis market updates, do this in a minute so that we have time for a few questions. So consumption lounges passed in 2021. Opportunities, so in this section I just want to talk about some opportunities in the commercial space for anyone who's working in cannabis. Planning approvals are ongoing. Some of the lobbyists that are representing these consumption lounges are not good at their jobs. And so what you're seeing is we had, Serena's a planning commissioner for the city of Las Vegas. They recently heard 2 proposals for consumption lounges, and 50% of them were approved. And the other 50% were not. The other one wasn't. And so the thing is, when that person isn't approved, they're going to need another space. All of these folks are going to need spaces. So the more educated that you can get to mitigate bad lobbyists, you can help find retail spaces that are more consumption friendly, where you're not going to have all of the neighbors petitioning against you. So there should be traffic on that in the next 6 months to a year. They should all be opening in 2024. So opportunities to locate them or relocate them if they've picked a bad space. I would guess about a quarter of them will not get approved the first time around, and they will need to pop around and look and find some place that fits into the regulations. Cultivation market opportunities. the thing I left out of here was dispensaries. Those are pretty stable. Those are pretty set. So if you've got one, it's probably never going to move because it's a real pain to get all the zoning down and get everyone in the neighborhood to agree. But once you're there, your neighbors usually love you because you have 8K HD cameras looking at everything and no one's causing problems. So I actually left dispensaries off of this because those are pretty stable. Cultivation is a mixed bag for the future. So if you represent someone who has a cultivation that is tied to a vertically integrated business, so a cultivation that is owned by the company that owns the dispensary, you have one of the safest holdings because that's where the market is going. If you're a hockey fan, that's where the puck, you're skating to where the puck is going, that's where the puck is going. More and more, you're gonna have the vertically integrated businesses taking on more grow space so they can sell their own product instead of having to purchase the product. Now, what you're going to see, so that would make you think, okay, if you own a standalone grow license, you're at risk. You are in this market because eventually those vertically integrated businesses are going to want to grow as much of their own marijuana because it's cheaper and better for their bottom line. However, we've seen a precipitous drop in the retail price of marijuana over the last 6 years. When medical only first came out, I remember I purchased my first ounce of marijuana for $690. Last week, I bought it for 99 bucks. And so that has been the drop since 2016 when the first when the first medical dispensaries were opening to now. That's bottoming out. It doesn't go much below that. So if you look at all of the more established markets, $99 ounce specials are about as cheap as it gets because you're reaching the cost of production plus a little. And so if you've got a grow that is stable, prices shouldn't get much worse, and there's one factor that should help. We've increased the purchase amount from 1 ounce to 2.5 ounces per visit. And so what you're going to see are a lot more medical patients giving up their dude because they needed to have a guy to supply them because they needed to purchase more than 1 ounce at a time. That'll bring more medical patients into the fold. The other thing that is probably an unintended consequence that we don't encourage is marijuana taxation in California is off the hook. They literally triple the price of weed because they have a city tax, a county tax, and a state tax that they add to it. And they found a way to take something good and just completely mess it up. So the thing is, a lot of people that are driving up here for the weekend they're not gonna buy there and bring it here. They're gonna buy here and bring it there. And so we just increased what they can buy here and bring it there by adding 150% to that. So that should help the cultivators here stabilize that and stem any losses. So I'm cautiously optimistic that some standalone grows will be able to survive. If I were in your shoes, though, I would look to build vulture capital groups. If you have a vulture capital group that can come in, there's going to be opportunities to take over grow licenses that fail. Not only will you get all of the infrastructure that they've put in, you'll get the license. You'll get people who just want to walk away. And so I would have vulture capital folks ready to go for both cultivation and for consumption lounges. Consumption lounges will take longer, but you may have some cultivation opportunities 6 months going into the next 2 years. And that is it. On the next slide is just questions. So Teresa is who you want to email if you want a copy of this slide deck, and then we can take any questions with the couple minutes we have left, but we got to get you out of here in 5.
Yes. Sure. So urban heat island effect is definitely a topic of conversation. It gets brought up at planning commission meetings across the board. And Leslie, I do have to give you a shout out. She is a fellow planning commissioner, but she's for Clark County, and I'm for Las Vegas. And we discussed that, right? We look at projects, and we're saying, okay, what is the landscaping requirement? There is much more of an emphasis, I would say, on landscaping, right, in terms of landscaping buffer, the type of trees that are going to be put in, and is it going to be helping to mitigate the heat island effect? I know for a fact, City of Las Vegas just redeveloped their master plan, their master plan till 2050, and a huge component of that is creating some, identifying some corridors for multi-use and higher density, and part of that has to be a walkability, which means there has to be shade, and there has to be a mitigation of that urban heat island. I think largely the conversation, if you're looking at a state or a local, is that it's been decided that this is a local issue, right? It's the local purview for zoning and planning, and so that is where that type of in-depth, in the weeds, that hyper-local, where exactly are these 36-inch box trees going to be put on this property, right? You don't really want the state to engage on that, because I think be a bit different comparing Clark County and Washoe County and Elko County, and that's just, it doesn't really seem feasible, but from a local, that's a strong conversation. It is something that is taken into account when we're looking at proposals and applications. I mean, it's kind of an ongoing joke, right? Like every time there's a presentation, you can just count. One of the questions, the trees. I don't know about these trees. I think I want more trees, higher density. Don't give us 24-inch. Someone's going to want 36-inch box trees. I can just tell you that. And no palm trees. No palm trees. But no, that is definitely a conversation. And, that map came out from NASA, and then every legislator started running around with it, right? They're like the east side of town is where you see the urban heat island really at its worst. And then Summerlin, right? Lots of trees there, a lot of lush landscaping. You see a noticeable difference in temperature. Elevation does play a role in that too, I will say. But there is also the urban heat island effect at work. So thank you for bringing it up, but definitely a topic of the hour.
We have 2 minutes.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay, so just to repeat the question, he was asking about that $380 million in terms of the public financing for the Oakland A's, and where is that? It's going to be, bulk of it will actually be coming from Clark County bonds. So a bit different, I would say, than the Raiders, but so Clark County is a local jurisdiction. We'll be issuing bonds to cover that. There is $25 million as well that Clark County will be bringing to the table to address infrastructure needs right around that Tropicana site, which was put into the bill, and so that location cannot change unless that bill were to be amended, which that at least that window has closed at the moment. So $25 million from Clark County directly to address the infrastructure, right? So yes, there will be more construction. I am sorry, it will not get better. It will get worse before it gets better around that area. And then you have about $180 million, I believe, is going to be the Clark County bonds that they're issuing directly, and then there is additional. It might be from state money that is actually going to help cover the rest of that cost. Clark County is kind of shoring up the bulk of it, since it is, if you look at the votes, I think it's really interesting. Sometimes you see a party line vote in Nevada. The Oakland A's bill was not a party line vote, it was a geographical split, north versus south. So if you look at the vote count, your southern legislators, Republican and Democrats, that voted in support of it. You have your northern legislators that voted against it, irregardless of party line. So you heard a lot too, where the pushback was, well, Northern Nevada got the Tesla factory. We all approved the Tesla factory. And so this is our turn now. So you see that push, right? Like, so there's Republican and Democrat, but there's very much so a Northern Nevada, Southern Nevada push and pull, I will say, that you see at the legislature. And so I hope that kind of clarified some of it, and happy to drill down even more later. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So yes, we do, and I have that in the email. So just to clarify as well, he was asking for the specific timelines, because there are specific timelines to keep in mind for if your project's going to be grandfathered in or not for evaporative cooling. So I will send that out in an email that, Paul, you're welcome to spread out to the membership, and it'll detail those timelines specifically. Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Thank you both for coming up. Now, I will say this. They have offered to stick around a little bit afterwards, so if you have questions that you weren't able to ask or had questions that you didn't want to ask in front of the group, please go ahead and ask them. I do want to mention that Tim Costello, who's sitting up here in the front, is on the board. He is our legislative affairs board person, so if this is your cup of tea and want to get involved with that committee, please see Tim. Before we go, if I could ask each one of you to draw one name for a free lunch.
Tabitha Pedersen.
Tabitha, so come on up.
And from Valley Bank of Nevada, it is Eric Varenchak.
Thank you. Thanks so much for everyone for coming. Again, I want to stay conscious of your time. It's just over 1 o'clock. Have a great summer. We'll see you in July. If you have questions, please come on up and ask the panelists. Thank you.